The Duke was a vampire, an aristocrat with no soul, feeding only on booze and cocaine. That's how David Bowie would describe the Thin White Duke years later. But during the winter of 1975 to 1976, the Duke wasn't just a character. He was the perfect synthesis of Bowie's cocaine paranoia, fascism obsession, and emotional emptiness. Every night he'd go on stage as the Duke, delivering a cold, distant, almost inhuman performance. And every night after the show ended, he couldn't step out of the Duke character. Duke in the hotel, Duke on the street, Duke in the studio. David Bowie was gone, and the Duke would drag him toward the Nazi salute scandal, mental collapse, and nearly to death. This is the story of Bowie's most dangerous creation, the story of a character that almost killed him. If you want to hear this story until the end, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button to support us. David Bowie's house in Los Angeles had turned into hell by the summer of 1975. The luxury mansion on Doheny Drive represented the Hollywood dream from the outside, but what was happening inside was a nightmare. All the curtains were closed because Bowie was afraid of sunlight. Cocaine paranoia had convinced him that the sun was harmful, even deadly. Strange symbols were drawn on the walls, occult signs, Kabbalistic diagrams, and most disturbingly, photographs of Adolf Hitler. Bowie's daily routine was no longer a routine. He wasn't sleeping, at least not in the way normal people understand sleep. Sometimes he'd stay awake for 72 hours straight, then pass out for a few hours. He wasn't eating, only consuming milk and red peppers. This bizarre combination led to weight loss and serious nutritional problems. Standing at 5'10", Bowie had dropped to 121 pounds. Bones were visible under his skin. His face was sunken, eyes retreated inward. Cocaine consumption had reached 8 grams per day, a level that could kill most people. But Bowie wasn't just surviving. He was also making music, giving interviews, working on a new album. However, this creativity wasn't the product of a healthy mind. It was a state of madness created by cocaine psychosis, sleep deprivation, and malnutrition. Visitors to Bowie's house during this period were horrified. Corinne Schwab, Bowie's loyal assistant, described those days like this: the house was like a tomb, dark, cold, and David himself was a ghost. He'd talk, but it was like his voice was coming from far away. Sometimes he'd look at me but didn't see me. There was nothing in his eyes. This emptiness was a sign that the Duke was being born. But the darkness in the Doheny Drive house wasn't just from cocaine paranoia. Bowie had deeply immersed himself in occultism, Kabbalah mysticism, and white magic during that period. Aleister Crowley's books were everywhere. Kabbalistic tree of life diagrams hung on the walls. Bowie believed there were evil spirits in the house and performed strange rituals to expel them. One night, when his old friend Tony Zanetta visited the house, he found Bowie naked in the kitchen, salt sprinkled over his body, reading Latin incantations out loud. Zanetta asked in horror, "David, what are you doing?" Bowie turned to him, eyes gleaming wildly. "Can't you see them? They're crawling from the walls. I need to stop them." Zanetta left the house that night and never returned. This occult obsession played a critical role in creating the Duke character. Bowie was trying to transform magic rituals into performance. The Duke's coldness, soulless movement, empty gaze, these were all results of Bowie's attempt to merge magic and performance. The Duke wasn't a character, he was a spell, and Bowie would become the prisoner of this spell. In the fall of 1975, David Bowie began recording his new album at Cherokee Studios. This album would be Station to Station, and would go down in history as one of the strangest, most disturbing albums in music history. But stranger than the album itself was the recording process, because during this process the Thin White Duke character was born and quickly began to consume Bowie's real personality. The musicians in the studio immediately noticed the change in Bowie. Carlos Alomar, the guitarist, would later recount, "In the first days David was still there, but with each passing day he became someone else. Cold, distant, almost mechanical. He'd give us instructions, but like a robot. Zero emotional connection. This was the Duke beginning to take control, The Thin White Duke character was directly inspired by Bowie's appearance during that period. The thinness, pale skin, sunken face, empty stares, these were all consequences of the physical damage created by cocaine. But Bowie turned this into a character. Black vest and pants, white shirt, slicked back hair. This wardrobe choice evoked 1930s European aristocracy, even the decadent elites of Weimar Germany. And the Duke's personality was even more disturbing. The Duke was emotionless, devoid of empathy, only superficial elegance and internal emptiness. Bowie described the Duke as the antithesis of romanticism. The Duke was removed from love, humanity, warmth. He was the perfect representation of cocaine and nihilism. Recording sessions at Cherokee Studios started after midnight and lasted until morning. When Bowie arrived at the studio, he'd already taken cocaine and continued using throughout the night. One time, bass guitarist George Murray saw Bowie's nose bleeding with blood drops falling on his white shirt, yet he continued recording. When Murray told him to stop, Bowie just looked at him and said, "The Duke doesn't bleed." During the recordings, Bowie's instructions became increasingly bizarre. He told musicians to feel European decadence in certain notes, to think about the rhythm of fascist marches. One day he told Carlos Alomar, "Think of 1930s Berlin, the Weimar collapse, last songs being sung in cabarets while boots march in the streets. I want that feeling." Alomar nodded in horror, but understood what he meant, and those guitar riffs created exactly that feeling. During the station-to-station recordings, Bowie's Hitler obsession reached its peak. In the studio during recording breaks, Bowie would talk for hours about Hitler, how he influenced crowds, how he used mass psychology, the nature of his charisma. This wasn't just academic interest. Bowie was trying to understand these techniques, perhaps to use them in his own performances. One night, everyone in the studio was shocked. Bowie had brought a video of one of Hitler's Nuremberg rallies and watched it for hours. Then he said, "Look, this isn't just evil, this is performance art. Crowd control, rhythm, timing, it's like a rock concert." This comment disturbed everyone in the room. But nobody could confront Bowie because he was a man who had completely lost control and wasn't aware of what he was saying. Bowie's comments about Hitler were a product of cocaine paranoia. Cocaine users often become obsessed with power, control, and manipulation. For Bowie, Hitler was the ultimate power figure, a man who could move millions with a single word. The Duke character was the embodiment of this power fantasy. But this obsession was entering dangerous territory. Bowie began appreciating not just Hitler's techniques, but also his symbolism. He talked about the beauty of fascist aesthetics, the power of totalitarian art. These thoughts were planting the seeds for the scandal that would occur later at Victoria Station. The first concert of the Station to Station tour took place on February 20, 1976 in Vancouver. The stage design was minimal, white lights, black background, no colorful elements. When Bowie walked on stage, fans were shocked. This wasn't the David Bowie they knew. This was the Thin White Duke. Bowie's stage outfit was entirely black and white, black vest and pants, white shirt, slicked back shiny hair. His movement style was robotic, mechanical. There was no expression on his face. When he sang, it was like a machine without a soul. Fans applauded but were also disturbed. This performance was cold, inhuman. Throughout the tour, Bowie remained completely inside the Duke character. He was the Duke off stage too. Duke in the hotel room, Duke at press conferences, Duke in interviews. His friends were worried because David Bowie was no longer visible. Once when Angie Bowie asked her husband, "Where is David?" Bowie looked at her with empty eyes and said, "There is no David, only the Duke." During the tour, Bowie's physical condition deteriorated further. While his stage performances seemed energetic, backstage Bowie was nearly collapsing. Cocaine consumption continued, and it was destroying his body. One night immediately after a concert, Bowie fell from the stage and couldn't move for several minutes. Doctors were called, but Bowie refused treatment. "Nothing can happen to the Duke," he said. During the tour, Bowie continued creating scandals with the interviews he gave. In an interview with Playboy magazine, he said, "Britain needs a fascist leader." This comment drew major backlash, but Bowie didn't back down. In another interview, he said, "Hitler was one of the first rock stars," and added, "He was very successful as a leader." These comments drove the music press crazy. In another interview with NME magazine, he told Cameron Crowe, "Fascism could be rock music's future." Crowe was shocked and asked Bowie what that meant. Bowie coldly replied, "Controlling the masses, moving them, only fascist leaders have achieved this. Rock stars should do the same." These interviews showed how much the Duke character was influencing Bowie's real thoughts. The Duke wasn't just a stage personality anymore. He was shaping Bowie's inner world. Cocaine, Hitler obsession, and the Duke character combined to push Bowie down a dangerous path. When the press published these interviews, reactions were mixed. Some thought Bowie was just being provocative, pushing boundaries. Others expressed serious concerns. But everyone missed something. Bowie was experiencing a mental breakdown, and the Duke was a symptom of this collapse, not the cause. By the spring of 1976, when the Station to Station tour reached Europe, Bowie's condition was at a critical level. Cocaine addiction, sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and complete dependence on the Duke character, all of this combined to push Bowie toward total mental collapse. And all of this was preparation for the scandal that would occur on May 2, 1976, at Victoria Station. Returning from Paris to London, Bowie hadn't slept for 72 hours. Cocaine consumption was at record levels. Corinne Schwab was begging him, "Please eat something, sleep a little, pull yourself together." But Bowie was buried so deep inside the Duke character that he was ignoring even his basic needs. On the train from Paris to London, Bowie continued talking about Hitler. He explained Hitler's strategic mistakes to Corinne, what he would have done if he were in his place. Corinne was horrified, but didn't know what to do. David Bowie was lost, and in his place had come a character inspired by Hitler, feeding on fascist aesthetics, completely removed from humanity. When they arrived at Victoria Station, Bowie's mental state was a complete disaster. The Duke character was in total control, and a few hours later, in that open-top Mercedes, Bowie would make that fateful hand gesture. But this gesture wasn't just a spontaneous decision of that moment. It was the culmination of months of damage the Duke character had created in Bowie's mind. To understand the thin white Duke, you need to examine his psychological structure. The Duke was very different from Bowie's previous characters. Ziggy Stardust was hopeful, Major Tom was adventurous, Aladdin Sane was crazy, but the Duke was nothing, completely nihilistic, emotionless, an empty shell. The Duke's most dangerous feature was the absence of distance between him and Bowie. When Ziggy was created, there was a clear boundary between Bowie and Ziggy. Bowie could put on and take off Ziggy, but the Duke wasn't like that. The Duke was born from Bowie's actual state created by cocaine, sleep deprivation, and mental collapse. The Duke wasn't a performance, he was a symptom. Psychologists view the Duke character as a form of dissociative identity disorder. Bowie had created the Duke to escape from his own pain, addiction, and guilt. The Duke felt nothing, so he didn't suffer either. The Duke's coldness was the manifestation of Bowie's emotional death. The Duke's mental world was a reflection of Bowie's darkest philosophies. During that period, Bowie had misinterpreted Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, transforming it into emotionlessness and desire for power. The Duke was Bowie's version of the Superman, beyond morality, beyond emotions, beyond humanity. But this philosophy was actually complete emptiness. The Duke had no power, only void. The Duke couldn't love, because love was weakness. The Duke couldn't connect, because connection was vulnerability. The Duke only performed. He didn't live. And this was a perfect escape for Bowie, because as long as he was the Duke, he didn't have to feel David Bowie's pain. The Station to Station album was the musical manifesto of the Duke character. The album's opening track, the 10-minute Station to Station, perfectly reflected the Duke's soul. The song was cold, mechanical, but at the same time compellingly powerful. The lyrics "The European Canon is Here" showed Bowie's admiration for European decadence. The song "Golden Years" was superficially pop, but underneath was a dark emptiness. Word on a Wing showed Bowie's spiritual search, but this search was desperate and hopeless. TVC-15 told of technology obsession and the loss of humanity. The album was musically brilliant, but emotionally disturbing. Every note reflected Bowie's mental state during that period: cocaine energy, paranoia, sense of emptiness. Studio musicians realized how bad Bowie's condition was while recording the album. Earl Slick, the guitarist, said, "David wasn't there. He was wandering around the studio like a ghost. He was creating the music, but as if from another dimension." The Duke character didn't just affect Bowie, it affected everyone around him. Angie Bowie was one of the first to notice the change in her husband. "I lost David," she told friends. "There's a stranger in the house. He talks with his voice, has his face, but it's not him." Bowie's son Duncan was only 5 years old at the time, but felt the change in his father. Years later, he would recount, "My dad was lost for a while. There was a man in the house, but it wasn't my dad. He was cold, distant. He didn't see me." This was proof of how far removed the Duke was from humanity. Bowie's musicians and close friends tried to save him but failed. The Duke character was so powerful that nobody could reach Bowie. Tony Visconti, the producer, once tried to sit Bowie down for a serious conversation. "David, do you see what you're doing to yourself?" he asked. Bowie looked at him with empty eyes and said, "The Duke has everything under control." This answer horrified Visconti. After the Victoria Station scandal, Bowie finally realized that the Duke had nearly destroyed him. The decision to go to Berlin wasn't just to escape cocaine addiction, it was also to escape the Duke character. But breaking free from the Duke was much harder than killing Ziggy. When he arrived in Berlin, Bowie hadn't brought the Duke costumes. Black suits, white shirts, everything stayed in Los Angeles. This was a symbolic move, but the Duke wasn't just a costume, he was in the mind. Even during the first months in Berlin, Bowie sometimes felt like the Duke, cold, distant, empty. Iggy Pop helped Bowie break free from the Duke. As the two men rode bikes through Berlin streets, Iggy would constantly tell Bowie, "You're David, not the Duke. Remember David." These simple sentences helped Bowie rediscover his true identity. But the Duke didn't completely go away. For years he remained as a shadow in Bowie's mind. Sometimes, during stressful moments, the Duke's voice would return, cold, logical, emotionless. Bowie learned to live with it, but never completely forgot the Duke. In Berlin, Bowie began rebuilding himself, but the Duke's shadow was always there. While recording the Low album, Bowie said he sometimes heard the Duke's voice in the studio, a cold, distant voice calling him back. Brian Eno, the producer, told Bowie, "The Duke wasn't a character, David. The Duke was your dark half. You can't kill him, you can only accept and live with him." This understanding helped Bowie make peace with the Duke. In the Berlin Trilogy albums, Low, Heroes, Lodger, traces of the Duke exist, but control is no longer in his hands. Bowie learned to use the Duke as a tool, not to be ruled by him. This was one of Bowie's greatest artistic triumphs, taking control of his own creation. The Thin White Duke remained as a symbol of the darkest period of David Bowie's career. This character was proof of how an artist could be consumed by his own creation, how cocaine addiction could lead to mental collapse, and how flirting with fascist aesthetics could enter dangerous territory. The Duke taught Bowie an important lesson: characters are dangerous. When creating them, you must maintain distance from them. There was no distance with the Duke, and it almost killed Bowie. When we look at the Station to Station album today, we see musical genius. But at the same time, we hear a man scream, the scream of a man asking for help, losing himself, drowning inside his character. Did the Duke die? Maybe, but he remained forever as a shadow in Bowie's mind. And this shadow always reminded Bowie, be careful of your creations, because sometimes they can create you.